While you're waiting for the class to begin, take a few minutes to learn about binary. There'll be a quiz during the class. Or is your webinar just another run-of-the-mill presentation where people politely listen, or they may be obligated to listen, or worse yet, they don't really listen at all? The presentation is on the screen and the audio is playing, but your mind is really somewhere else. Welcome to Creative Webinars, where we will explore the tips and tricks to make an impact and engage your audience. You've created the perfect opportunity for people to multitask. I'm already bored. Let's try that again.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Johnson, and I have been designing interactive and engaging learning programs for many years. Although my career may be sunsetting, there is still lots going on, and the lights of learning are still burning bright.
Now it's your turn to introduce yourself. Take a few minutes and review the package of pictures that I sent to you before the class. Determine if you feel any of those pictures represent where you are in your instructional design career and how you feel about creating learning experiences in general. If not, feel free to locate another picture on your computer. I'll give you a few minutes, and when we return, you can each share your screen with your picture or the picture you selected to introduce yourself. In our class today, we will learn about tips and tricks to create more engaging learning webinars. Start your webinar off with an eye-popping screen, story, or whatever. Just make sure to employ the wow factor. Do you want to learn about water safety now? If you're inclined to be funny, use humor. If not, simply make it fun. Keep things simple, light, and fun. Speak with energy and enthusiasm. Make it personal. Use the element of surprise to refocus attention. It need not have anything to do with the topic at hand. As a matter of fact, it's better if it has nothing to do with the presentation. If it's important for your audience to remember a key point, employ repetition. How many different ways can you repeat the same concept without boring your audience? Why do we remember some things but not others? How can we tap into emotions to help learners retain information? We're bombarded by information every day, from the TV, radio, web, social media. How do you break through all of that noise to get your message noticed? How do you make software or accessibility training emotional or interesting? Do you want to make something stand out? Use color to draw attention to various aspects of your presentation. Music also adds a nice touch. Make sure any stories or graphics you use are relevant and grab attention. The use of informational graphics are a great way to tell a story with visuals. For example, statistics show that 24 hours after you participate in a program or lecture, you'll remember roughly 50% of what you learned. In 24 more hours, 48 hours total, you'll lose another 50% to a grand total of 75% of the information initially presented is now lost somewhere in your brain. So on a good day, 25% of the content will be retained, and for the most part, we seem to be okay with that because we keep doing things the same way. Everyone's heard of the learning curve. This is the forgetting curve. The concepts and ideas that we're going to discuss today are all geared toward helping participants retain more of what they learn. Let's go back to the binary game we played before we started. What does this sequence equal? Did you remember how to calculate the number? If so, what was it about the game that made you remember? If not, what was it about the game that failed to help you remember? Share your thoughts in the discussion area. William Glasner, an award-winning American psychiatrist, came up with these statistics in his work about 25 years ago. We learn 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, 70% of what is discussed with others, and 80% of what is experienced personally.
As reflected in these statistics, teaching something you may not know well is a great way to learn information. Many scholars would beg to differ. How can you teach something that you do not understand well yourself? Well, in preparing to teach, you learn. In delivering the information, you reinforce what you have learned. In being questioned about what you have taught, you challenge your learning and then are afforded the opportunity to investigate and further deepen your knowledge and understanding of the subject.
Let me share a story. There was a young electrical apprentice who was struggling on the job. He was struggling to understand electrical processes. In addition, he did not always pay close attention to safety practices. This was a concern for the employer. As you can imagine, this was also a concern for the employee because doing something incorrectly in this field could be a life-threatening experience. In one of my visits with the employer, I suggested that this employee conduct one of the weekly safety meetings. He was very reluctant to let him try. The employer didn't want someone who was not practicing good safety habits to be sharing their information with other people in the company. I explained the concept that in preparing to teach people, learning the information and then delivering it reinforces what was learned. If there were any questions that were raised, it would then afford him the opportunity to investigate and further deepen his knowledge of the subject. So he agreed. The employee took on the challenge, and sure enough, in the preparation, he learned a lot about safety. Certainly, he was nervous. There was a lot of anxiety that came with it, which is typically contradictory to good learning. So we made sure that he prepared, and he prepared well to minimize the amount of anxiety he would experience. Once he delivered it, there were some questions, and questions he couldn't answer, to be honest. So he took those questions and suggested that he take time to research them, and maybe at the next safety meeting, they could talk about them. The employer noticed over the next couple of weeks that this employee was now exhibiting better safety habits. Thus, they came to the conclusion that in offering people the opportunity to teach, preparation for the teaching experience does help them learn the information. It is the most effective way people learn. Don't be afraid to challenge your students and give them the opportunity to teach something, in particular, something that they may not understand very well at the time. Make sure they are supported in the preparation of that teaching experience. Thus, it will be a positive learning experience that will solidify the new information and enable them to use it on the job.
Stories provide a heartwarming method to convey relational concepts to allow people to connect with the information.
Once again, let me relate a story. I think stories are a great way to engage your audience and to give them relevant information where they can take what they've learned and see how you applied it in your particular situation. So to make sure it's relevant to what we are talking about here, it might be helpful to understand that this was probably the most powerful learning experience I've had in my life. In addition, it will demonstrate a couple of the concepts we just talked about in this short tutorial. Many years ago, my husband and I were opening a business. This business was designed to teach people who had disabilities to use computer technology. My husband was visually impaired, so he was already using screen reading technology. The software would read most of the information on the computer screen back to him. It was in the early days of this type of technology. There were still a lot of issues trying to get the hardware to work with the software, and there was a lot of custom work that had to be done. I had no experience with computers at this point in time. I was a secretary who used a typewriter, and it worked well. Despite that, we decided to invest our time and money as there were not a lot of people doing it, and there was a need. So we took what money we had saved, and we invested in a training program for Dragon Dictate. They were a voice recognition provider that enabled you to talk to your computer to dictate text and navigate the desktop. So let's say you have a mobility impairment and you can't type or use a mouse. Dragon allowed you to do that with your voice. So this was a new adventure. We were excited, even though it was a new learning experience for us, particularly me. So we purchased our tickets and began the adventure. Little did we know that the trip to training would be part of the adventure. It provided a brief glimpse into the challenges that lay ahead. So we were going to Boston for the training and a license to sell Dragon products. It was winter and we were living in Wyoming, so we would have to fly through Denver. No surprise, it was snowing in Denver, and in our next layover city of Chicago, the flights were all delayed. So we braved the treacherous mountain drive to Denver and boarded our delayed flight. We arrived late in Chicago and raced to our next flight, only to find it was not only delayed for weather, but also there was no pilot. He was at a Chicago Bulls game and he wasn't going to leave until the game was over. Must have been one exciting game. So rather than get into Boston at 11 or 12 o'clock, we arrived at 4 in the morning. The rental car company was closed, so we had to wait until 6 a.m. for them to open. The next thing I know, with virtually no sleep, I'm in a training class learning to operate a computer. I don't operate well without sleep. Not only am I learning the computer itself, but also this new software. The training was scheduled for 5 days. This was my first day, and it was tremendously challenging, not only due to lack of sleep, but also because the hardware was not talking to the software. Out of 12 people in class, mine was the only one that did not work. So while the others are off learning more things, I'm over here trying to figure out how to make my computer work. Dragon was working with me, but my computer was sporadic the whole week. I spent 5 days in Boston for what? When I got home, I took my laptop along with the manuals and threw them in a closet. I felt this was a big waste of money. I was frustrated, disappointed, and upset that I had made such a poor decision. After 2 or 3 weeks, I peered into the closet. I took a deep breath and pulled out the laptop. I opened the tutorials. Even though they were not extremely well written, they were a start. I loaded the software. It didn't work. But the good news was, I knew how to fix it. I did learn that in training. I learned a little bit about the software and slowly built up to a voice file. The computer struggled to recognize my voice, but I knew how to fix that too. A month later, we landed our first contract. I was scared to death. How could I accept money to teach someone something I didn't know well myself? I committed to stay one lesson ahead of my student. Remember that I was living in Wyoming? There wasn't cell phone technology at the time, and there was no remoting into people's computers to access professional help. I had to figure it out all on my own. And what I learned in training was being used to help my new clients. That week in Boston became my saving grace. I learned more in that week than I paid for, and it was paying off quite nicely.
Case studies are a great way to give people the opportunity to learn the information they have learned in your webinar. Remember, experience is a powerful teacher. You can also use your students to teach other students during the case study. Have your students get into groups or work with a partner. They can share ideas on how to implement what they learned. Or if time is an issue, simply have the learners summarize what they have learned using chat or notepods. Give each learner an opportunity to articulate what they learned and how it can apply in their job or situation. This is a simple way to assess if people have paid attention and if they understand what you presented. In summary, for your presentation to have an impact, remember, focus on the needs and desires of the learner, engage them, and make it meaningful. If you follow these simple concepts in your learning webinars, they will be more effective and engaging.